Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to present at this forum. We will address this question: is London already a 15-minute city? Between Shivani and I. So, how do Londoners spend their day? They may go for a jog or a walk in the morning, go to office, go to school, go to shops, and go for leisure activities, music concerts. How do they travel to these areas? And we hypothesize for most of the things, basic activities, they may stay local, but for work, they may be willing to travel more, and maybe for certain performances and cultural activities. And where do they go for these activities? So as you see in this map, it's the public transport accessibility map, shows London is very well connected and has a world-class transportation system. And the London plan strategizes development in these nodes that are well connected and around the transportation hubs. So we believe that people mostly stay local for most of the activities, but let's see what Shivani has in store to see whether that's true.
Thanks,
To you,
Monika.
Shivani.
Thank you. So everyone has different interpretations of the 15-minute city. To us, it's a place where your basic needs are accessible within 15 minutes by all sustainable modes, not just walking or cycling. We used London Travel Demand Survey data to explore our main research questions. We looked at trip purposes, modal information, trip durations, and we also considered how these might vary for people of different gender identities, ethnicities, and income levels. We have done extensive analysis in the following slides, but I will only introduce the most important snapshots to you. Here is an overview. The bar graphs at the top show the 5 main activities for London, and the colors represent the different modes as shown in the legend at the bottom right. The y-axis shows the number of trips, and the x-axis, the first bar shows the amount of travel within 15 minutes, and the second one shows travel beyond 15 minutes. We confirmed that work is not local, with most Londoners traveling more than 15 minutes for work. However, other functions lean towards being local. This is true for inner and outer London, as seen in the graphs in the middle right. Next, we will dissect this information by gender. So on this slide, the top row has graphs per activity for men and the bottom row for women. While patterns are similar, some gender stereotypes manifest in travel behavior. So more men travel for work, whereas more women travel for local shopping and personal trips, such as going to the doctor. Women also undertake more local accompanying trips, such as dropping children off at school or caring for an elderly relative. This adds to the finding that men cycle more, whereas women take the bus more. So next, we dissect by ethnicity. The top row has graphs for BAME people and the bottom row for white people. Main findings here are that more white people work locally, and BAME people typically take slightly more trips that are longer to get to their destinations for work and education. BAME people also rely on the bus more, whereas white people are comparatively more comfortable with cycling. And then finally, we do the same exercise for income. Lots of graphs and interesting findings on this page also, but I want to bring your attention to 2 key findings, which are as follows. The proportion of leisure trips becomes more local as the income goes up, and car use also becomes higher with higher income for the local trips. Back to you, Monika.
Thank you, Shivani. That was a whirlwind tour of a lot of data. But what we saw is that other than for work and leisure, London seems to be a 15-minute city. And there is opportunities where car use could be reduced to get to more sustainable modes. So we look at the challenges and opportunities which COVID-19 has highlighted even stronger for us. Work from home trends seem to be permanent based on various research, and central activity zone is in danger. And is that really true? People are still using more cars and avoiding public transportation systems. So is it a car-led recovery? And we also saw inequalities based on gender, ethnicity, and income levels. But there are several opportunities in those. We can have a mix of flexible uses in the local centers as well as in central London, which would reduce the peak level demand for travel to the center for work and improve leisure demands in the center. We have also seen during the pandemic that people are exploring their local areas much more and having a much healthier active lifestyle with increased cycle use. So all of this has been captured by London in their street space reallocation program, where streets are more being reallocated for people to walk, cycle, and shops to open safely. And this makes us hopeful that there can be a strong economic and cultural center, while the local centers can be vibrant and emerging hotspots.
Hello, my name is Andy Graham. I'm going to talk to you about the medieval city of Leeds. And what I hope to demonstrate that it has a lot of the ingredients of a 15-minute city. So it's based on the presumption that the historic city is a sustainable city. And, you know, largely it was built around people, not cars, or oxen perhaps. It was built around those as well. It contained a mix of uses within close proximity to each other. Localized facilities, shops, manufacturers, schools, religion. It's well connected, direct usually, with routes to and from different places. Locally distinctive, place was built of its context, of its place, of its landscape. Many historic settlements, of course, sustain themselves in food, fish ponds, crop rotation, building materials, local quarry and woodlands, etc. So I started looking at, this is the 1890 map of the centre of Leeds, or part of the centre of Leeds. And I started initially just looking at where were the, what I call the civic buildings, churches and markets, libraries, and I mapped them all on. And then this slightly evolved into the where were the green spaces and the open spaces, just to try to get an idea of where these things located in relation to each other. This wasn't quite good enough for me, so I ended up looking at the Goad plan of Leeds, which, if you've never seen them before, absolutely fantastic resources, which actually show all the uses and the materials, not only where the windows are, but the uses of these buildings as well. There's a zoomed in image of that. And then just looking at the study area, which was about 15 minutes from end to end there, and mapping in a very SimCity sort of way the dwellings that were shown on the Goad maps and then transcribed onto the 1890 map. The shops, these shops often had dwellings above them. The leisure uses, theatres, music halls. The industry, now this is more or less the heavier industry, so the kind of ironworks and foundries. And then storage and lighter industry, warehouses, large breweries, flax mills, etc. in the kind of light brown there. The practical uses, these are very interesting. So these are the blacksmiths, the wood turners, the joiners, the small brewers, the drapers. These are the kind of guys down the back street who've been there for centuries. And literally in this case, they may have been. We'll come on to that later. The pubs and the hotels and the restaurants in blue there. And offices. Now this is quite interesting, where the offices are providing the first emergence of the central business district, if you like. The religious, civic, schools, churches, synagogues, libraries, almshouses, kind of reflecting the first slide actually there. And then looking at the town in its chronological phases really. So we have the Georgian town, which was speculative development initially on the manorial land of residential, and then that was changing in 1890 to be this office-based use. The Victorian expansion to the north, again, a lot of mixes of uses there, but the real mix of use I found was in the medieval burgage plots in the centre. Now, the medieval burgage plots were built around Briggate, which was laid out in 1206, and I'll show a slide of that later. But the Georgian town being built largely speculatively on the former manorial park. Maurice Beresford's East End, West End is the quintessential text on this, if anybody's interested. In 1890, the money use associated with the CBD was beginning to emerge, with large footprint buildings amalgamating. But there were other uses as well, such as clock factories and a horse hospital, which I found fascinating. The Victorian town, now this obviously spread in all directions in Leeds, but it was very much your lines of terraces and your mills, and there was a good mix of uses here. However, when looking at the medieval town, this is where we see the former burgage plots populated, the yards infilled, and we have uses here that possibly date to the well, a few hundred years, I imagine. You know, we have the joiners, the wood turners, the blacksmiths, the drapers, along with lots of brewing, storage, and a few leisure uses such as cinemas and music halls. This is the burgage plots of Leeds. So you can see If I just go back to the previous slide, you can kind of see the lines of the Burgage plots and the way that these tofts were actually infilled. So in summary, the city of Leeds of the late 19th century was infinitely walkable and mixed use. Everything could be obtained within a 15-minute walk at least. Though overcrowding was an issue in later centuries and seen as an issue, the fabric of the buildings was actually demonstrably capable of refurbishment and reuse, and had been over 700 years. The social infrastructure was everywhere. If you were an older person here, you had everything you needed within probably a 5-minute walk. You know, everything was there literally on your doorstep. The core of the medieval area was still contained many uses that appear to have been very old even in the 19th century. You know, this was the culmination of sustainable development up until the birth of modernism, I guess. Whereas today, if you lived in an area like this, you'd have to drive in your car and go out to B&Q to get a piece of 3x2, you know. But here we have all these uses, all these wonderful craftsmen and craftspeople just working there in the centre. So the area, more than any other, illustrates the vibrancy of use that had been laid out more than 700 years earlier. It still now contains a mix of uses, not as much, but it still functions as a key attraction and a key place in the centre of Leeds. And very, very briefly, that shows what, you know, tries to capture this mix of uses and show how much there was within a 15-minute walk at least. And when you think about it, I think that's a sustainable city and the 15-minute city, and it's a historic city as well. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pauline. I work at the Greater London Authority, and I am a long-time member of the Young Urbanists. My case study is about Brasilia, the capital of Brazil since 1960. Brasilia was built on an empty plateau and planned from scratch by urbanist Lúcio Costa and architect Oscar Niemeyer. In many ways, Brasilia was ahead of its time, planned as a 15-minute city. Indeed, Brasilia's daily life is very much designed and organized to create a thriving local area with easily accessible services and shops. As with the concept of the 15-minute city, residents in Brasilia have, in principle, access to a whole range of essential services and shops, all within a short walk from where they live. As you can see on the sketch, Brasilia was planned using strict zoning rules. Each neighborhood unit is composed of 4 residential areas, in yellow on the sketch. Around the residential areas, spaces have been allocated to a range of shops and services, such as retail, community hub, faith center, GP, library, school, as well as green space. Focusing on the red parts, so the local commercial offer, 3 interesting tendencies happened over time, which led to changes in the zoning rules to accommodate emerging needs. These tendencies can offer interesting insight to the planning of 15-minute cities. Relatively early on in Brazil's existence, a phenomenon of clustering appeared, whereby some local streets specialized in similar activities. This disturbed the original plan for residents to have access to a whole range of local services within a walking distance. As you can see on the slide, Street 109 and 110 South are almost exclusively specialized in lighting products. Another example is Street 302, which is a cluster of drugstores. This is not surprising since a local hospital is located nearby. The second tendency relates to changes in the types of commerce. Shops located on the local high street had to be authorized by zoning rules. Over time, the municipality reviewed and expanded the list to respond to organic changes taking place in the commercial street. The 2 graphs on the slide show how the types of shops and retail changed over a period of almost 50 years. Following the evolution of consumption trends, the presence of food and fashion-related activities increased dramatically, while the number of shops offering, for example, fabrics, shoes, tailoring services reduced. Finally, informal activities popped up, such as street vendors, bringing more options to residents. These informal vendors probably spotted an opportunity to respond more flexibly to unfulfilled needs from local residents or passerbys. I shared these three tendencies because they are the results of a few interesting manifestations on how the city and its residents adapt. First, it is clear to me that these tendencies are the result of changes in people's consumption habits. People nowadays buy more often clothes or house items and eat out much more often than in the past. I believe that the rise in new types of retail also played a role. Second, underlying economic structure and the geography play a role on where activity is set up. The clustering of drugstores close to a hospital is a good illustration of this. Clustering also allows shop owners to benefit from economy of scales while potentially offering a more efficient shopping experience to city dwellers. Finally, an important thing to consider is population change and the diversity of habits and needs. Brazil's population, for example, grew from 3 to 4.5 million in almost 20 years. More importantly, in cities, we find thousands of different lifestyles, shopping patterns, income levels, and it's difficult to respond to all those needs in a limited space. In the case of Greater London, twice the population of Brasilia, that becomes even a greater challenge. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.